Hi, everyone. This is Lauren Appley with the Landfill Methane Outreach Program, here for our session focused on RNG, renewable natural gas. So we had a pre-recording available. If you had time to watch it, great. It was a long pre-recorded session because our speakers went into a lot of great detail, sharing their story about their RNG project and all of the RNG upgrading technology options. So please take some time to watch that later on if you have the time available, and learn more about what these guys spoke about. But just for a quick recap and maybe to remind you, I'll turn it over to John just to talk about what they presented.
Great, thank you. John Welch with Dane County. We're located in Madison, Wisconsin, and the surrounding areas. So we are a municipal waste and renewables department. With this project specifically, we've been doing a lot of things with landfill gas over the years. We've produced renewable electricity for over 20 years. We saw those markets changing and a contract coming due. So we looked at all of our options and ultimately decided we wanted to move forward on RNG, or renewable natural gas production, using our landfill gas. So over the course of the last few years, we've gone through engineering, design, construction, and startup of that plant. The plant started putting gas into the pipeline April of 2019, so a little over a year ago now. At our landfill, we're doing about 1,800 SCFM of landfill gas, injecting that directly into a pipeline that we're fortunate enough runs through our property. A couple of things that make our project a little bit unique is that we finance the entire project, and we own the plant and own all the gas rights. More importantly, or maybe even more unique, is that we have what's called an offload station. So really, that's a location and some equipment on site where outside sources of biogas can bring their cleaned up biogas to our site and use our offload station to offload trailers, tanker trailers full of RNG, and get it into the pipeline. So essentially, we're giving outside sources of biogas access to that pipeline and the revenue that comes with that.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that quick reminder of the real innovative design you guys have come up with for all these different RNG, developers and biogas creators in your area to access the pipeline. That's a real great step forward for the industry, I think. So our other panelist here, Allison Rathsack, is with John up there in Wisconsin, but we also had a presentation from Brad Huckster at Green Lane Biogas. So I'll let him do a quick recap of what he spoke about.
Sure. So we basically wanted to focus on different technology options. Green Lane is the only provider with multiple upgrading technology options. And so we really wanted to focus on how that applied to landfill gas upgrading projects, specifically high nitrogen projects, such as most landfill gas applications are. Obviously, landfill gas has a high level of nitrogen in the biogas due to air intrusion, and when you remove the CO2, that value doubles. And so it is absolutely critical in virtually all landfill gas applications that you have some nitrogen removal in order to meet the pipeline specifications. So what we wanted to look at were the different options that were available, specifically looking at water wash plus either a PSA or an NRU, a nitrogen reduction unit. And we talked about the differences between PSAs and NRUs and where each is applied. Membrane plus an NRU, and then the two-stage PSA, and where those best fit, what types of applications they best fit, kind of the pros and cons of each, any limitations on each. And as a bit of a summary, I guess, what really came out of the comparison that we did and the look at these different options was that if you have some sort of beneficial off-use for methane, the two-stage PSA is a very, very powerful and very effective means of upgrading landfill gas, even high nitrogen landfill gas. And because of that, tends to be what we're seeing in the industry today.
Great. Yeah, thanks. I really enjoyed all the kind of flow charts on your slides. It really helps you see clearly what gas comes in and goes out and gets separated out where. I thought those were really helpful. Kind of the easiest to understand I've seen, not being on the development side myself. But okay, so yeah, that's our panel for you. We would love to see your questions, and please type them in if it's for the group. We can pose it to everyone, or if it's for someone in particular, we can address it to them. But maybe just to get the conversation started, what do you guys see as the current barrier to bringing an RNG project online, assuming there's enough gas at the landfill, at the site? What's the biggest barrier these days?
I mean, I'll jump in. I think one of the biggest things we're seeing in our current situation, projects are moving ahead. Project development is moving ahead as fast as it can. We haven't seen a big fall off due to that. What we are seeing, though, is that the lenders are being a little more cautious. They're really focusing on the high CI score projects. They're a little more nervous about releasing funds for these projects than they were, let's say, a year ago. And so we are seeing some delays because of that, especially in the more difficult financial projects, specifically landfill gas, which is a little higher risk, a little higher investment than some of the other options out there, like dairy manure and things like that. So we're seeing these projects struggling a little bit to necessarily land the financing just because of that kind of nervousness that there is in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
I think another challenge that the industry is seeing is also the uncertainty in the RIN markets as well. It's hard to get funding when you're kind of estimating all the RIN prices and what the future is going to hold with those RIN prices as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll echo what both of the other speakers said. Having some certainty in the programs, especially because of policies, national or statewide policies, will absolutely help with, the revenue RIN prices that Allie's talking about, which of course just helps with being able to secure financing. And I would add to that too, that plays in on, if you have a municipality that's considering a project like this, that plays into their risk analysis as well. Getting an owner to decide that they're going to spend $20 or $30 million on a project, and not having that certainty 3 to 5 years out on what the revenues could be off that project can be a challenge.
Yeah, definitely. We hear that a lot, and I think it's always a challenge, and it takes a lot of good thinking and planning to do the best we can in these uncertainties. So we've got an audience question that I'll take a read on here. Let's see. Do you all have any suggestions for getting local gas distribution companies to buy in and allow access to their pipelines? So are the industry standards and successful projects pointed to ease their concerns? What kind of sets those companies' minds at ease when they're approached by a landfill project developer?
I think from our point of view, there's certainly a wide range of utilities across the country. You've got the utilities who are, I think, a little more progressive, a little more interested in the marketing and the benefits that come along with accepting and in some cases reselling renewable natural gas. And then you've got some pipelines which quite honestly aren't as interested. They don't see the value of it in terms of greening their what's typically a fossil fuel source. And it really can be seen in not just the specifications they put out for landfill gas to RNG applications, but in how helpful they are when you're trying to go through that development process, and whether they really want these projects to happen or not can be seen in again just in those specs and whether or not they're willing to be flexible and they're willing to understand the intricacies of RNG, and not just hang their hat on an unrealistic number, for example, like extremely low oxygen or extremely low nitrogen for RNG applications. you've got these guys who want to put 500 CFM of renewable natural gas into their pipeline, but oh goodness gracious, it's got 0.2% oxygen, and they jump up and down about that, and yet 100 miles downstream they're connected to another pipeline. They're sharing hundreds of thousands of CFM of this gas that's at 1%, and so it's do they see that, and do they understand that, and do they see that there's a value to putting RNG in their pipeline and working with developers to make that happen, as opposed to working honestly.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I'd say it's gotten a little bit better in the last couple of years. I think it will get better moving forward. I think Brad's right. They will continue to see some of those kind of green image benefits and being able to reduce the carbon footprint of their product. You can add a relatively small amount of RNG and really have a big impact on percent of emissions reductions of the carbon footprint of their product. So I think you'll continue to see more of that. But yes, it's very difficult in many cases to work with a local utility. They're very concerned about this and will put either really stringent requirements on there. Put really stringent requirements on there, or just refuse to work with you in general. There's been a couple of examples, I think, recently. I think it was in Upper New York. They came out with some standards which could help with the industry. I believe Duke Energy has been doing some projects recently. And there's also, I forget the name, but a utility in eastern Minnesota has been working on a project as well. They made some public announcements. So those are some examples. Otherwise, I'd encourage, if you're having challenges with your local utility, look for a transmission pipeline, someone that has to follow FERC rules. That's the federal rules. In that case, they have to accept that gas at the same quality standards that they have of existing tariffs. And so you just really need to find a pipeline, and maybe you have to truck gas to a pipeline and an interconnect point that way.
Great, that's good input and feedback. Yeah, it's good to hear, at least from my perspective, that things have kind of improved over the years, and I'm glad you mentioned all those groups or states that have put out some standards so that everyone's kind of working from the same page in the region. And that New York standard's a good step in the right direction, I think. So let's see, maybe talking more about like cost and bringing a project online. Looking back maybe 10 years ago, these RNG projects weren't as common. So as technologies have improved and these projects are coming on more often, do you think that there's a point where someone could feasibly use a lower amount of landfill gas to have an RNG project? Usually it's, you have to have a large landfill, a lot of gas to make it feasible. Is there technology improvements such that smaller volumes of gas can work in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing a trend towards smaller landfills all the time. A lot of the low-hanging fruit, as people like to call it, has been snatched up, and people are looking at it already. Although, that said, there's landfills out there with 10,000 CFM more of gas that are still generating power because there's certainly a sweet spot, and too big or too small. Too big, I think, just. People get hung up on the amount of capex and the amount of risk that's there with RIN values. Too small, and of course it just has trouble penciling it out. Especially if that landfill is not sitting on a pipeline. But we are seeing a trend in the industry to people looking at smaller and smaller landfills. What's helping with that, I think, is certainly technology options. Again, one of the things we talked about is getting inventive with how you deal with landfill gas. The traditionally nitrogen reduction has been very expensive and kind of a thorn in the side. And now with PSAs getting better and looking at things to do with that off gas, from the PSA, you can really make this a much more cost-effective project. We're seeing people do some interesting things downstream with some new and inventive ways to deal with the nitrogen. But I still think the most important advancement that's probably helped the landfill gas industry is, or certainly one of the more important ones, is well field management, automated well field controllers. and the use of those to just get rid of the nitrogen in the first place, to dial back the wells that are the problem child, that are bringing in 20% of the wells are bringing in 80% of the nitrogen, and using automated services to dial that nitrogen back and just getting rid of it in the first place, because every percent of nitrogen that you can bring down in your landfill gas is going to have a major impact on not just the amount of capex you have to spend and the opex you have to spend, but the methane recovery that you can achieve, and therefore the revenue from your project.
Great. Yeah.
The only
Good point.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is that, for those small, I agree that you're going to see a trend towards, smaller landfills today than what would have been looked at 5-10 years ago. I'd say too, if you feel like you're on that bubble, maybe you're in that 1,000 to 1,500 SCFM range, spend a little, a big factor that's going to be your potential revenue. And there's this risk about RINs and where the markets are. I would say spend a little bit of money with a consultant to understand that market better. It's a very complex market, so get some risk analysis with them. As we went through that process, we became much more comfortable with the potential for the rules changing, the program changing, what the markets are going to do in the next year or 2 years. So there's some very good vendors out there, from Eco Engineers to Weaver to Blue Source and many others. Spend a little bit of money with them to better understand that revenue and that risk, and what you can do with your volume of gas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great, thanks. So let's maybe talk about accessing the pipeline. I think one of you mentioned there's probably plenty of landfills out there with lots of gas, but they're not sitting on a pipeline. Can you talk about how easy it is to do some of those other access options? Like, it's pipeline injection the best, easiest, most cost-effective option, or is it becoming more usual or easier to do those virtual pipelines or on-site fueling stations? Have you seen any trends in that area recently?
I think we've, virtual pipeline is a significant expense. It is, something that's difficult, I think, with any RNG application. I think even more so maybe on an LFG application that is already, a little more difficult to pencil out than some of the higher CI score projects. Obviously direct injection into a pipeline, a lot of landfills are sitting in kind of outside of town in more industrial areas and are lucky enough to have a pipeline running underneath the property. That's absolutely the best case scenario. If that's not the case, virtual pipelines are certainly an option. One of the other things, which I think is a very powerful idea and makes just for absolute marketing gold, is if you can use that gas to fuel the trucks that are coming on and off the landfill all day. Set up a fueling station right there. Convert those trucks over to natural gas. Set up a fueling station right on the landfill, and fuel the trucks that are going up and picking up the refuse. And the marketing gold of that, of being able to say, look, the garbage that we're collecting and we're using it to fuel the trucks that are collecting it, is very, very powerful. And we're not seeing a lot of people looking into that option. We're seeing everybody is going, pipeline injection. And, RIN values and LCFS are obviously driving that. But if that's not working, that is certainly something to keep in mind. Is there is a huge number of RNG projects around the world that are just providing vehicle fueling, and there is certainly a possibility to do that.
Yeah, I love explaining that example as well. Sorry, go ahead, John.
Sure. Yeah, no. Maybe Allie, if you could add to that about kind of the build it and they will come. What we've seen with our injection, yes, there's a lot of cost to it, but what have we seen since we've built our injection site in terms of interest from customers?
We've seen the interest only increase with having that availability, especially in Wisconsin with a lot of dairy farms throughout the state. But a word of caution is it can be a logistical nightmare just trying to plan the trailer, fueling up the trailer, getting the trailer there, having the driver be waiting until the trailer is done. So there are a lot of logistical headaches that can occur with an offload station if you decide to go that route. But it is an interest, and it is good, especially if you're coming from a digester with manure and breaking into the California markets.
Yeah, to give you kind of an idea, for a manure digester, it may be several millions of dollars for them to create their own injection point, or to find a pipeline near them and then create their own injection point. And just kind of rough numbers, it changes for every project, but you pencil out CapEx, OpEx for them to truck it instead with the cleaning equipment, the trucking, and everything else added onto an existing digester. It's roughly that $8 a decatherm range. So if they can afford to give up $8 a decatherm rather than spending $4 million in capital to interconnect, we're seeing that interest. We're seeing a lot of people approach us interested in using our interconnect.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you guys a few questions, maybe to talk more about that, interconnection point. Was that something you guys thought of on your own? Like, hey, there's all these dairies here. Like you said, just build it and they will come, or was there some dairies out there that you'd heard from asking for this?
Yeah, we have actually a long history with at least two of the multi-farm digesters in our county. We helped with some initial feasibility studies to get the right parties together. We don't own those projects, but we have a lot of involvement in them. So we knew that they were facing a similar situation as us, where their power purchase agreements for electricity were going to be expiring, and they really didn't have a lot of options. And Allie can probably tell the nightmares of this, but we were well into design of our landfill gas project, probably between 50 and 75% done. And our county executive, the highest elected official, Joe Parisi, came to us and said, "Hey, is there any way that we can try to help these digesters out as well?" And when your boss asks you to do something, you try to figure out a way to make it happen. So Allie was instrumental in that, but we on the fly kind of changed everything and added in about $5 million worth of equipment to that system.
Great.
I kind of keep.
Yeah, and Allie, you.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say.
I was going to ask a follow on. I'll
Go
stop talking. I'm the moderator.
I was just going to say, I kind of keep wondering when somebody will put together a business plan and just start putting interconnects in every state around the country. And again, I think it is a matter of, if you build it, they will come. And I wish I had some money sitting around. I think that would be my next business venture. Go to these high concentration areas and build an injection point, and suck up that cost and make it back in terms of an unloading fee. I'd like to see them all over the country, like reverse gas stations, where people show up to drop their gas rather than fill up.
That's a great vision for the future. I like that too. Allie, I wanted to ask you a question. You were just talking about the kind of logistical challenges of getting all these trucks into the injection point. Who is it that kind of manages that? Is it, the dairy calls you up and says, "Can I drive a truck over on Tuesday?" Or is it, something you guys are doing centralized? Like, is that another job for you guys at the landfill?
Yeah, as of right now, I'm trying to coordinate all the scheduling with that. But some of our vendors, we pretty much give them a time slot, and they have to come to that time slot. And then we just kind of build in other offloaders as they kind of request to unload.
Okay.
We're trying to get it down to a system where it's slotted time slots for each vendor.
Okay, well, let's see. We can maybe change directions a little bit. We were just talking about, what the future holds. Do you guys see, are there any policy considerations that, kind of are emerging that could change how we see RNG projects coming online? There's a lot of interest in renewable thermal as an end use for RNG, but I don't think there's a huge impact of that yet. But what are you guys thinking? Is that kind of changing the way these projects are developed, or how quickly they're developed?
I don't think we're seeing anything from our end. I mean, it still seems to be everybody just pushing for pipeline injection. Certainly policy is very important and is driving this industry and is necessary. One of the points raised earlier about some stability in RIN values and things like that, I think is absolutely critical. There's been talk of eRINs and basically applying a similar kind of incentive towards power generation. That can certainly have a massive impact on the industry. Certainly if it drives people back to generating power as opposed to generating natural gas. So there's policy and where it goes in the future is really going to have one of the biggest impacts for sure on this industry. But if we could get some stability first before that happens, that'd be great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I mean, I think we're going to continue to see some moves from individual states and individual utility companies to move towards more and more RNG, which is only going to help, of course. But having, that larger policy assurance is going to be critical. It's no secret right now that 80 to 90% of your revenue on a landfill gas project is coming from RINs. So, do we have that assurance that RIN prices are going to be stable in 3 years or 5 years? Because if you start a project today, it's going to be at least that point till you have a project running and have a couple of years of revenue to justify, or to give you some payback on that expense. There's a lot of things factoring on RINs, a lot of court cases. There's things with waivers of the petroleum companies and how EPA is interpreting those. It'll be interesting to see how a lot of that shakes out in the courts and how the EPA rolls out their rules. Of course, there's questions about at the national level. If you have different administrations in there, how are their EPAs handling or interpreting this program? And of course, you're going to continue to have pressure from oil companies pushing back on the program. So can kind of the Corn Belt states push back enough to keep that in play? That's a big factor on it when you're looking at this as well. And one more thing I'd say is, right now the way the law is written, there's goals written in, or there's a goals for the numbers of gallons each year, and those goals actually go away in a couple of years. And so the program still exists, the law still exists, they're still required, but the question is, okay, in a couple of years, what will that EPA and that administration set as the goal then for this program?
Right. Something to keep an eye on for sure. Yeah. I had a thought about, with your injection point that you guys have open for other vendors to offload their gas, do you think there's, more opportunities out there for injection points with multiple feedstocks for their RNG where, you guys are getting gas from some dairies at your landfill injection point? I know that there's probably a few where there's some wastewater gas going into pipelines. Is there any good existing synergies for people to work together? Maybe you'll have a landfill nearby the wastewater treatment plant, and that's an obvious place to work together. But are there other opportunities out there for maybe consolidating gas to make it more feasible?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're bringing putting gas in the pipeline from our landfill. We already have dairy digesters under contract. I think within the next month or so, we'll have our first wastewater treatment plant under contract. It really doesn't matter to us what the source of the gas is. If it's pipeline quality gas, we can put it in. Mm-hmm. It's really going to be driven, I think, more on the policy side of things. There's obviously different gas is categorized different into different categories within the RINs program. So is there enough value for that? And a lot of times, if you're talking, multiple feedstocks, for example, putting food, fats, oils, and grease residuals into a manure digester, that actually is worse for it financially mm-hmm. because of the way the programs account for that. So, quantifying what type of gas it is at that project, and then making sure there's policies in place to incentivize or there's enough revenue from that type of gas. As long as you can do that, the injection point could take from anywhere.
And also to add on to that, just keeping track of the source of the gas too, just so you can show compliance for each of those different sources. That's going to be a huge driver on that, especially if you're trying to go to California or at the EPA level. It's critical to show quality and quantity for each of those sources.
Great. All right. Well, there's maybe time for one more question. So unless I see any more pop in from the audience, I'll just throw kind of a look to the future question for you all. Do you see RNG as like a sustainable, renewable source for the next 20, 25 years? Is it, something that's going to be sticking around? Is it, is it worth all this that we're putting into it? And I sure hope so, but I'd like to see, what do you guys think of the long term on this?
I'll jump in on that one. I mean, you look at the policies that are out there globally from governments to for decarbonization, and there's 50 different ways to take the electrical grid and make it green. You've got wind power, you got solar power, you've got all these different options. When it comes to the natural gas grid, which is equal in size to the electrical grid, there's only one option, and this is the only option, is you change it from fossil fuel to renewable natural gas. And so, here you are with half of the energy consumption that's out there, and only one way to do anything to make it environmentally friendly. So absolutely, I think RNG is critical. I think that, the unsteadiness that we currently see, if governments are going to stand up and make the changes necessary, make the policy necessary to meet the goals that they've put out there, they've got to get behind RNG. It's an absolute necessity. And you can keep pushing things on the electrical side. You can keep pushing batteries and solar and wind and power and all these different things on that side of the fence. But you jump over the other side, and there's only one place to put your money where your mouth is, and that is in RNG production. So yeah, I believe it's critical. I believe it's going to continue to grow, and I'm sure there'll be challenges along the way. But I don't see any way. The naysayers out there who say, "Oh, this could all go away tomorrow." If you look at the goals that federal governments have to meet, there's no way for them to meet them without this. And so that alone says that it has to be a part of the energy initiatives going forward.
Yeah, I'll weigh in on that too. I mean, you look at a lot of the deep decarbonization plans out there, and they call for electrification of as much as possible. Electric vehicles, even electric heat and electric appliances. And the reality is, I live in Wisconsin, and almost all homes are heated with natural gas or LP. And in the next 10 years, that's not going to change. You're not going to, retrofit every home in America in the next 10, 15 years to be on all electric for heat. So yeah, Brad's exactly right. If we really want to meet these goals for emissions reductions, we need to have RNG for both vehicle and for heating natural gas for homes and businesses.
Definitely. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Maybe got a minute to spare here, so I'll just say, thank you for listening. Thank you all for joining me on this panel and providing your great presentations earlier. I think they're very valuable for sharing your story and your experience, and explaining how this RNG technology options work. And yeah, if anyone out there in the audience has any further questions, I'm happy to take them. And via email at lmop@epa.gov is an easy way to get in touch with me, and I can get you in touch with these presenters as well. But with that, I think we'll say thanks for watching and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.